Susie,
Rob,
Happy New Year and welcome to the snowy season. It's a snowy here in Manchester. I understand you've been off skiing.
I have. It was lovely. We had lots of snow in French Alps. Yes.
Lovely. Did you manage to fall off and damage your back?
Um, no, I didn't actually.
Because that's what I worry about if I go skiing. I'm worried that I'm going to damage myself and in my old bones.
Yeah, but don't be a baby, Rob. You
No.
could damage yourself crossing the road.
Well, okay, but I guess I'm asking about the back damage because I'm thinking about dinosaurs with their back damage. Have we got lots of evidence of dinosaurs breaking their backs?
Well, Rob, funnily enough, that is what
Mhm.
we're going to talk about on today's podcast. So, Happy New Year to you as well, Rob. How are you doing? How was your Christmas? Was it lovely?
It was great. I just want to show you this t-shirt that my sister got me. This is obviously won't work for the audio content, but you could describe it.
Oh wow, it's a Burgess shale. Is it an anomalocaris, Rob?
It's a Nomlocaris. And
It's an
what's he saying?
anomalocaris. What is he saying? I do my best.
Well, that
Oh,
was a nice present of fossil related things. Did you get any fossily related presents? Presumably not.
well, actually, I got a t-shirt from my mum that says easily distracted by rocks on it. I don't know that I'm going to be wearing it that often, I'll be honest.
Uh-huh. I guess when you're skiing in the Alps, you don't get to look at the rocks because it's all covered in snow.
Well, sometimes I do actually. When you're sitting on a ski lift, and you've got a nice cliff and you're going up past it.
Yeah,
I did a bit of alpine geology as an undergrad, so yeah,
yeah,
I always enjoy looking at rocks in the Alps. Yeah, amazing
good.
folds.
So, just as a reminder of the format to everybody, each week Susie and I will be discussing a paleo paper that is interesting and that's come out recently and can tell us something interesting about the world of fossils and evolution. This week is a bit different because Susie's leading on the paper because it's all about dinosaurs, but I've been the one to suggest it to Susie at its most lurid content. So, Susie, do you want to tell us about this paper?
Well, we're going to talk about sex today, Rob.
We
In
are.
fact, specifically, we're going to talk about sex in hadrosaurs, which is maybe I've given away the punchline. I don't know. But we are going to talk about this paper that is called Deciphering Causes and Behaviors, a Recurrent Pattern of Tail Injuries in Hadrosaurid Dinosaurs. And this is by Filippo Bertozzo, who is currently at the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, and a whole host of authors from across Europe, from Italy and Belgium, and Northern Ireland, Belfast, and also some Americans and even some Russians. So it's a big team or international team, which I reflects the data collection I think that has gone into this work
Mhm.
really. Um, yeah, and it was published. It was published in November, wasn't it? Wait, I'm trying to find the publication date here. It was 21st of November, so just before
So,
Christmas.
so this is fairly fresh, just a Christmas present for the new year. This is in iScience. I'm not sure what iScience. It's a part of the cell family. I'm not sure what iScience is.
I've never heard of iScience.
No.
But as you say, it says Cell Press at the top, so it must be part of Cell Press. I
All
don't know
right.
what it is. I don't know whether it's their it's open access,
Yeah.
and I don't know whether it's one of these sort of new journals that many of these big publishers have, where they will sort of publish fully open access, rapid publication, sound science, type
So just
journals.
as a reminder to listeners, we always post links to the papers that we're discussing, and open access ones, anyone can go and have a look at them, including the pictures. And this one is worth having a look at the pictures, I think. So go and see if you can follow the link and have a look at some of the pictures. Anyway, I'm
I
spoiling it.
actually, I mean, just for the benefit of the listeners, I actually screen grabbed one of the pictures and sent it to Rob last night while I was doing this, just for lols. There's some quality pictures in this. There's some lovely artwork. Lovely.
I did have to explain to the children why I was laughing at this mess.
Right. Anyway, should we go on with the paper?
Yes, let's.
Okay. So, Filippo, the lead author of this paper, has spent he's an early career researcher, and he spent his relatively short career so far studying paleopathologies in
Hmm.
dinosaurs. So, paleopathologies are injuries that have
Hmm.
healed, or not just injuries, but evidence of disease or that sort of thing that has healed in fossils. Do you get that in invertebrates? Do you see fish with injuries, Rob?
Yeah, I published a paper with Emma where we looked at some fossil fish that had bite marks in them. So we looked at the interesting thing that we found was that these fossil jawless fish had a larger number of bite marks on them and into evidence of predation, which was a good ecological thing going on. Maybe our jawless ancestors were being eaten by our jawed ancestors. Nice.
But
But I
don't
guess
you
that's
have
what.
but you don't have the jawed ancestors in the fossil record, or yeah, you've only got the jawless
Well,
ones.
yeah, in
Or
the Devonian we do. Yeah,
oh, cool.
yeah,
That's interesting.
it's
Okay.
nice.
Well, in dinosaurs and other vertebrates, I guess pathologies have long been recognized.
Hmm.
And they can be caused by all sorts of things. As you said, you could predation is one. But you can also, animals can break their legs or break other bits or, bits of them.
Hmm.
They can have cancer, bone cancer. They can have arthritis. And, there are all other sorts of things. You can get sort of septic bits that affect the bone and how the bone tissue grows. And these are
Mm.
usually can be identified on the bones because they usually are kind of anomalous, irregular,
Mm.
and look weird, and often they have a weird texture. Um, I think as we go through this paper, there's a couple of things to consider. Um,
Hmm.
the first is that many of these pathologies have very similar etiologies. That is that they present the same result.
Hmm.
So it doesn't matter really if you break a bone
Hmm.
when your brain bo when your brain breaks when your bone
When your bone
breaks
breaks.
you get a healing callus. So that's like a
Hmm.
lump that forms on the side of the bone, and it's like loads of bone that is deposited very, very, very rapidly. It's kind of chaotic bone.
Hmm.
And what your body does is it starts off with this big kind of irregular lump around, and then over time it resorbs that bone and eventually gets it back to
Hmm.
kind of a normal shaped bone. Um, but also, if you have bone cancer, certain types of bone cancer, you can also get a very similar sort of callus. So
Hmm.
I did some work with some Chinese authors on a dinosaur some years ago, which had a callus on its leg, and they interpreted that it had bone cancer, and thus it had led to breakage of the bone.
Hmm.
Um, now I was involved with it from a sort of taxonomic point of view of the dinosaur, but I have really no idea how they determined that it was bone cancer rather than, that caused the break rather than the
Hmm.
break that caused the callus. It's very difficult to tell these sorts of things. So I think the first thing is that actually determining what caused a callus is quite difficult.
Hmm.
And there's other things as well. So you get drainage sinuses in bones, which is effectively where you have like some sort of infection in the bone. Now, reptiles don't generate pus in quite the same way that mammals do, but there's still some sort of pus-like substance that would be oozing out, and it
This
leaves
is
the
more pussy
bone.
than I was expecting this to be. I wasn't expecting so much pus this morning.
Yeah, I know, right? And actually, I know about this largely through Filippo and reading Filippo's work because this is not something, I don't work on this stuff, right? I work on rocks. I like rocks.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
much less pussy in general. But anyway, so you could actually have a situation, the authors talk about this, where you can have people have interpreted like a pit,
Hmm.
which they said is a bite mark in a bone, but it could actually be a draining sinus where some pus has
Mm.
drained out of the bone. So there's all sorts of things that can look the same.
Hmm.
So that is a little bit complicated when you're looking at pathologies.
So just as a quick this isn't massively uncommon. We have a Gorgosaurus in our department, a big cast of one. He sits there nicely, or she, I can't remember. But that has it has really interesting pathologies all over it. Like one of the bones is broken and rehealed, and you can see where they're slightly offset from each other, but there's a mass around it. You can see some of the vertebrae have sort of gotten a bit distorted and incomplete and grown. And there's even like those tumorous type things in it as well. And so this massive Gorgosaurus, this theropod, this large dinosaur, just sits in our lobby. But you can actually, if you, I like to take the students there and look at it and go, look, you can see these things here and here and here. It's only a cast, but you can still see all that damage and the healing, which implies this long, interesting experience of this animal. But I guess this raises interesting questions about how and why that happened. Which is, I guess, where we're entering with this dinosaur sex paper.
Absolutely. And I mean, the other thing, of course, with these pathologies, I think that, how is a question. How did it happen and why did it happen? And why did your Gorgosaurus have so many and why, and that's the crux of this paper.
Hmm.
Um, so I think we just kind of need to bear in mind that firstly, that there are there could be different causes that cause the same apparent
Hmm.
injury in the bone,
Hmm.
but also that multiple different behaviors might result in the same injury.
Hmm.
So um, there are some issues, I think, around using pathologies to look at behavior that we have to be aware of and we have to account for and think through. And I think the authors
Hmm.
actually do quite a good job of explaining all this in this paper because
Hmm.
they go through multiple different scenarios
Oh yeah, yeah.
about what they see. But we'll get into that. So what did they actually do? Well, firstly, actually, we should talk about what hadrosaurs are, shouldn't we?
Yes, please.
Hadrosaurs are, I like to think of them as the cows of the Cretaceous period.
Hmm.
So they are herbivorous dinosaurs. They are known colloquially as the duck-billed dinosaurs because they have these kind of very broad snouts,
Hmm.
and they process vegetation in their mouths. They're mega herbivores. They were four-legged but quite slender. They uh, lived entirely in the Cretaceous, and they're
Hmm.
known predominantly from the Northern Hemisphere. So in Northern Hemisphere late Cretaceous ecosystems, almost everything that you find is a hadrosaur. And then there are
Hmm.
some other dinosaurs too. So hadrosaurs were incredibly common
Hmm.
in Asia and North America in the late Cretaceous period.
So just to interject, the hadrosaurs are they'll turn up in all sorts of kids' dinosaur kits, right? All these different kinds of give us some names of some famous ones. Is Iguanodon one? I don't know.
No,
No, that's not.
iguanodon's like a iguanodon is an iguanodontian, and
Uh,
the iguanodontian dinosaurs evolved into the hadrosaurs. So hadrosaurs are iguanodontians, but iguanodontians are not all iguanodontians are hadrosaurs. If you see what I mean.
okay.
So hadrosaurs are a clade within iguanodontia. A famous one that people will be familiar with, probably if they think back to when they were seven, was Parasaurolophus, which has a very big crest on its head. So lots of these animals have
Ah, right. Okay.
quite interesting crests, which have all, I mean, actually, the authors talk about some of this in this paper, like what the function of these
Hang
crests
on, hang
are.
on. What did you call it?
Parasaurolophus.
What? I would say Parasaurolophus. Is that massively
Yeah,
wrong?
yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't mind. Whatever
It
you want to.
does scare. Well, I should take
So
your pronunciation with
I
me.
think we
Well,
generally call it. So there's another one called Saurolophus, and then there's
okay,
Parasaurolophus.
okay.
Um, Parasaurolophus is Canadian. Um,
So the important question I want to ask you about these hadrosaurs before we go too far, because it's relevant for later on. They're quadrupedal, right? Or are they bipedal, or are they a bit of both?
Um, this has been controversial. I've worked a lot on this, and I think that now we are like 99% sure that they're quadrupedal. Yeah, they have
Hmm.
four limbs,
Hmm.
that are almost uh ungulate like in the way that their bones are sort of
Mm.
tightly fused together, but also there's been some really nice ones recently that have preserved the soft tissue. So a thing that we see
Oh,
very
yeah,
commonly in
yeah, yeah.
hadrosaurs
Hmm.
is a preservation of soft tissues, and there's loads of hadrosaur mummies that we know. It's quite interesting. I think there's some
Hmm.
interesting work to be done on why hadrosaurs preserve their skin so regularly. But anyway,
Hmm.
and we've got some that they almost have like mitts around their hands, which show that
Hmm.
they couldn't spread their fingers or anything like that.
Hmm.
So their hands are kind of this almost like tubular thing, and they were walking on their, right on the end of their toes, not quite like a
Hmm.
horse, but almost, right
So
on the end of
a bit
their
hoofy, a bit
a,
hoofy.
a little bit hoofy, but not quite. So
Okay,
I think there's a very large body of evidence to suggest that they were quadrupeds. Yeah,
so these guys did this big survey of pathologies in hadrosaurs, right?
yeah, they did. Um, and actually, Filippo, he went through a ton of museums, loads and loads and loads of museum collections. And what he did, he came to our museum, he came to the Natural History Museum, and I remember him doing it. And he basically went through every single fossil, every single dinosaur
Yeah.
bone in the entire collection, and
Hmm.
looked at which ones had pathologies and which ones didn't. And he made this huge database. Now, hadrosaurs are enormously common, as I said, and so many museum collections have very large collections of hadrosaur fossils. And this is probably why this paper focuses on hadrosaurs, because they are just the most abundant that we have. So what uh, Filippo, sorry, did was he went and he looked at all these bones, and he realized that hadrosaurs had lots of injuries. He found lots of hadrosaur bones. They had lots of injuries, and that um, there were many, or the most common bones that were injured in hadrosaurs were the vertebrae. And I would say this isn't massively surprising. And that's because, obviously, if you think about a skeleton, you've got actually exactly two, humeri, two femora, two
Hmm.
tibiae, two fibulae, two ulnae, two
Hmm.
radii.
Yeah.
two of everything except for the vertebrae. And in hadrosaurs, I mean, I don't know how many vertebrae hadrosaurs have off the top of my head, but like ballpark, they're going to have at least 80.
Hmm.
So you're going to have many, many, many vertebrae per individual hadrosaur, right? So the
Hmm.
fact
Hmm.
that vertebrae are the most common element of hadrosaurs preserved in museum collections is not surprising,
Hmm.
because every hadrosaur had many of them. Now, uh, I've got to look back at exactly what the numbers are here, but he identified 551 pathologic neural spines in individual hadrosaur tail vertebrae.
Hmm.
Um, and so this is loads, loads and loads. What I'm not sure that he says, and I'm just desperately scanning here through the paper, how many vertebrae he actually, uh, yeah, how many hadrosaur bones there were in total in this database. And I
Oh,
know that
I
they,
can tell you that.
oh, can you?
So I've got
That's
the table
useful.
in front of me here.
Okay,
This
so
is
Rob, I should say that Rob did in fact look up the supplementary data.
well,
Well done, you.
that's because I wasn't wanting to know about the stats. That's why, because I love my stats. They've got for the Russia collection, they've got 500
Let's come to, well,
core.
yeah, but we'll come to that. We'll come to that. We'll come to that. We'll come to
Right.
that. Right. So, but first of all, he's got a huge database which just
Yeah.
generally has hadrosaurs. But then, of course, the issue with this is that, that your museum collection could be very biased, couldn't it? So,
Yeah.
an individual specimen, um, like it could represent just a single vertebra, or it could represent
Uh-huh.
an entire articulated hadrosaur. So
Hmm.
we don't know how many individuals are making up. So we don't know how many individuals there are in his database, right? So
Hmm.
what the authors talk about this, and they actually say this is a limitation of their study, is that they've said, one vertebra equals one specimen, but actually each hadrosaur has, let's say, 50 tail vertebra, 60 tail vertebra, I
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm.
So one called, they could all be from the same individual. Um, I don't also know, and they also identified, as part of this data collection, seven. Was it seven? One, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine.
Hmm.
Nine, and they've got a figure of this in figure one. Nine actually articulated tails of
Hmm.
hadrosaurs, or like sections of tail vertebrae with
Hmm.
with broken neural spines.
Yes.
So then, we should say what a neurospine is. A neurospine is kind of it's a bit of a vertebra that pokes up above the body of the
Hmm.
vertebra.
Hmm.
Um, and they identified seven of those, and then two kind of sections of vertebrae. But they didn't say how many tails there were overall. So I don't really know how many proportions of what the proportion was of articulated hadrosaur tails were completely normal and didn't have broken neural spines.
So yeah, in the table, they've grouped all, they've got two main collections they're talking about here, one Russian one and one Wyoming one. And the Russian one, I mean, this is the get across the scale of what they've done. They've got hundreds of specimens of skulls. So there's 500 skulls in this Russian collection, 500 caudal vertebrae, 167 ribs. So that, I mean, this is the numbers involved are crazy. But of the pathological ones, there's like 79 pathological caudal vertebrae and six pathological skulls. The Wyoming numbers for pathologies are much smaller, which is interesting. So there's a big difference there between the two of them, which again could indicate all sorts of things. So the headline is we've got hundreds and hundreds of specimens, potentially from multiple individuals, potentially from a few individuals. We don't really know. And some of them are damaged, but that damage seems to be concentrated in the tail vertebrae, less so than the other bones of the body.
Yes.
Hmm.
So okay, so that's an interesting pattern,
Yep.
and that's what they've identified. So how would you, Rob, go about trying to figure out what would you do next? How would you figure out, what would you?
Well, I mean, I would be interested in the stats, but that's not really that because I think I like thinking about stats and I want to think about the distribution. I want to think about the bones that don't have damage and then compare them with the bones that do have damage. I think about the number of individuals. If I want to evaluate the hypothesis to why they've got lots of broken tails, I guess it's trying to think about some biologically plausible reasons why that might happen. But
Yeah,
testing those is very, very difficult in the fossil record.
it is, and I think this is kind of the crux of the issue here. But they do a little bit of stats. I think it would have been useful, again, if I said if to talk a little bit about normalization of the number of bones
Oh,
in the
oh, oh, I have a
collections.
better answer. I have a better
Oh,
answer to your question. What would I do? I would look at crocodiles and elephants and giraffes and look at the distribution of bone damage in them.
Okay,
That's what I'd want
nice.
to know.
And interestingly, there's a few papers on dinosaur bone pathologies, and people do that. So particularly with a
Hmm.
particular hypothesis in mind. And actually, the authors do get into living animals later on,
Yeah,
don't they, when they get
yeah,
into their
yeah.
hypotheses.
Sorry,
But
I
they
interrupted you.
they do something interesting. They then they decide to use FEA, so finite
Hmm.
element analysis, to examine how or why these bones might have broken, what loads might have broken these bones. So finite, and have we talked about FEA
I
before? I'm
was
not
just
sure
about
we
to.
have.
I think well, FEA is used all the time in fossils, and I know that we've actually mentioned it on the podcast before. Oh no, we had Emily Rayfield on to talk about it.
Oh, yes, in the
For the
okay, good.
SVP. But
Yeah.
we should, as a quick summary, we should explain it's an engineering technique to look at how bones can be deformed. So we can take a digital model of a bone, apply some sort of known properties of bone to it, and we can smash it up in a digital model and see what it's adapted to do and how it might be damaged or transformed in different ways to look at the stress and strains. Is that a fair way to sum it up?
I think that's a very fair way. So we can apply a load in particular orientations to look at deformation and how a bone
Yeah.
might deform. Now, I think there's an important caveat, which is that just because something can do it doesn't mean it did do it. But
No.
we can park that. Um, so what they do in this is they get some caudal vertebrae. They get a model, a digital model of some caudal vertebrae, and they have a chain of five. Now hadrosaurs
Hmm.
have this incredible lattice of ossified tendons along their backs, and this is like it's like a kind of cross-hatched pattern of very thin ossified tendons which hold the bones together, and it's a
Hmm.
bit like a kind of suspension bridge to support the
Hmm.
spine. And this, of course, so they modeled this as well, which is very important because, of course, that's going to confer extra strength and change the flexibility and stuff like that of the spine. And what they do is they apply loads to the vertebrae in different orientations, and it sort of shows what you'd expect. If you apply a load sideways to the neural spine, it bends the other way, and the maximum stress, the maximum compressive stress, is the other side of where the load is applied. And that you can kind of apply. You can measure a relative amount of stress that is going to make these spines break. Um, at the end of this study, there's quite a nice section in this. I guess this is an iScience formatting thing. They have a
Hmm.
limitations of the study section, and they
Hmm.
actually say that a limitation of the study was that they would have liked to have modelled the whole tail of a
Hmm.
hadrosaur, but their workstation wasn't powerful enough to carry out
Well,
that
yeah, the digital
analysis.
model of a whole tail would be very
Computationally
complex.
expensive.
It would have a lot of different facets and moving bits.
It would, and I'm actually not convinced that that is a major shortcoming of their model, because I think actually you probably don't really need to do FEA to know that if you put loads of load
Yeah,
on a neural
yeah,
spine, it breaks.
yeah.
And so I actually don't think that really is a limitation of their study. I think what
Mm,
they showed was that these neural spines are deforming in a way we might predict. But I think
mm,
it's a nice facet of this paper that they've actually done some real modeling
mm,
to demonstrate that I guess what we think might be true is actually
mm.
true.
Yeah.
And sometimes we miss that, don't we, in these sort of papers that are about kind of behavior and stuff like that. So I think that's a nice aspect of what they've done. And then basically the authors then go through and they come up with a series of hypotheses about what might have caused these patterns of breakage. And they kind of go through and they start off with talking about predation. And again, you mentioned earlier that you go and do a kind of survey of living animals,
Mm,
and they
mm,
do talk about this. They talk about, successful killing rates of killing prey in raptorial
mm,
birds and things
mm,
like this. I mean, I do, and I do, I don't always think that our living fauna. In fact, I rarely think that our living fauna are good analogues for particularly
mm,
herbivorous dinosaurs,
mm,
because there's all sorts of differences to the way that mammals behave, mammal predator prey
mm,
relationships in mammals
mm,
and dinosaurs, particularly in there wasn't. I think it's highly unlikely that there was any pursuit predation going on. So none of these enormous,
mm,
T-Rex was not chasing a hadrosaur. They were not galloping.
mm,
They simply couldn't move that fast.
mm,
The modeling by some of our colleagues has demonstrated that things like T-Rex ran, they would literally
mm.
break their bones. They
Yeah.
simply didn't. They were too big.
Mm,
So I'm not necessarily always convinced by using living animals, but nonetheless, it's, 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 interesting, I think, and informative to talk about things like prey success. But they argue that, actually this pattern of proximal and mid-caudal vertebral injuries is not consistent with predation for a number of different reasons. And, you might expect big, well, firstly, hadrosaurs are massive, right? They're about 3 meters at the hip. So you've got to have a
Hmm.
big animal coming down and biting them on the back of the tail.
Hmm.
Um, but you might expect the injuries to be all over the body. So you wouldn't necessarily expect this kind of injury that indicates broken neural spine. You might expect, bite marks. You might expect more
Hmm.
shed teeth in
Hmm.
hadrosaur skeletons. And also they say that if it was an animal coming down and biting on the tail, you might expect it just to be limited to a few vertebrae, five,
Hmm.
six, something like that. And as we said earlier, actually, many of these animals with tails that are pathologic have a very, almost all the neural spines in the
Hmm.
proximal and mid region are damaged. So they rule out predation. They then
Yeah,
talk
I wasn't
about
quite sure about that. I mean, they also highlighted evidence that predation is happening. So, I mean, it seems like you couldn't necessarily rule it out, but well, let's move on, I guess. Hypothesis number two.
So hypothesis number two is muscular stress induced by rotational displacement. And this basically focuses on could the neural spines have been bent by muscles that run along the tail, kind of
Mhm.
pulling on the bones. Now this seems like it would be a pretty crap design if your muscles
I don't
broke
know.
your
When I
vertebrae.
struggle, if I sleep in a funny position and struggle to get out of bed, I feel like I'm a hadrosaur with all my vertebral spines pinging off. Bang, 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 bang. Ah, why?
Fair enough, but humans haven't really fully evolved to be bipedal yet, have we? We haven't really had the amount of time we've needed to fully evolve bipedalism, I think, probably, especially not by the age of 45. Anyway,
Wait, 44. Come on now.
okay. Um, anyway, that they rule that out. The stress distribution's wrong. The rotational bending that you would expect from the
Mm,
muscles isn't right. They've
mm,
identified this. I think it's a load of between 30 and 60 degrees
mhm,
to the kind of dorsoventral axis of the spine is
mhm,
is the best angle that explains these breakages in the neurospines
mhm.
using their finite element modeling. So this kind of rotational it doesn't really work. And I think I don't you know
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
really think it's a sensible hypothesis anyway. To be honest
Yeah.
with you. They then talk about herding and trampling, and I think this is interesting because this is something that's been suggested before
Hmm.
is this idea that because it has been noted that there were a lot of tail injuries in hadrosaurs before, and there's an
Hmm.
idea that when hadrosaurs were sitting down or lying down if they were herding, other members of the herd might have trodden on their tails.
Hmm.
And I don't think this is totally implausible. I mean, I think
Hmm.
that this sounds actually kind of I can see this happening, right?
Hmm.
Great big dangly long tails and
Hmm.
people standing on them.
Hmm.
I can see that happening. But again, they discount this basically because they think well, firstly, the animal's too big, although I'm not sure about that, but that again, it would just be a small sequence, 4 or 5 vertebrae. It wouldn't damage the whole tail. Intraspecific sparring is another hypothesis. So this is the idea that they were swinging their tails as a defense mechanism against other
Hmm.
dinosaurs, either, I mean, and they talk about it as an intraspecific thing.
Hmm.
So it could be fighting for females or something like this. I think they discount this one because they think that you would expect to see, sort of side to side contact. And so you'd see more like side to side breakage of the vertebrae. Um,
This one annoyed me a little bit because the tails, yeah, yes, okay, if you're using a tail to hit another tail, but that's not quite what happens. If you think about giraffes have this whole complex behavior of smacking each other right exactly where these vertebrae would get broken, right? Well, actually, do they do it? No, they do it on their
They do it with
sides of
their
the
necks.
body.
They do it with their necks
Yeah,
as
but
well.
they're hitting each other with their heads,
Yeah.
and that could be a completely plausible thing that the hadrosaurs are sparring and hitting each other's with their using their heads to hit the back of their body, or does the FEA think that makes that unlikely? Is it because the angle of attack of this is going on?
Oh, that's interesting. So I had interpreted this to be that there was like tail to tail sparring.
Yeah, that's
So
what they're
rather than
saying.
hitting with the
Yeah,
side of the body, but you're right that
yeah.
they could be hitting with other parts of their body.
Well, as
So
the extant models, a large quadrupedal herbivorous tetrapods, there aren't a large number of them to look at today that do that, but giraffes
no,
do whack each other with their heads.
there's that great paper, isn't there, called Necks for Sex, which is about sauropods using whether they use their necks to, as in the same way that giraffes do, to sort of have intraspecific fighting for sexual display. It's
I
called
have
Necks for
not read this
Sex.
paper. I need to go
I
and
don't
read
I don't
next
know
for
whether I've
sex.
actually ever read it or
I
whether I
might need
just
to.
remember it. because it's got a
I
good
might need to
title.
change my Google algorithm before I go searching for that to make it a bit more. I'm sure that's going to be niche. Anyway, moving on. So
Okay.
I don't want to rule out interest-specific sparring, but they
No,
do.
and
So let's move
I
on.
agree. So I think we've got some other, and then they talk about some other behaviours, which I mean we would just complete have no evidence for whatsoever. So I think we'll just skip past
Whoa, whoa,
hypothesis
whoa,
five
whoa.
probably.
No, we can't skip atypical behaviors because that this one was a really weird one for me because it was like, well, just that just means anything else. This is just a
Yeah.
basket category for weird stuff like wallowing in the mud, or which they described as uh social mounting between males. This behavior is very rare in nature. I mean, I don't know which clubs they've been hanging out with, but there's a different kind of activity going on. They give a citation for that being rare, but male mounting behavior in free range golden snub monkeys. Okay, well that's a different one. But I guess having something called atypical behavior is a bit of a catch-all, which includes all sorts of things. Anyway, moving on to we should move on to the main event.
Okay, so the main event and the one that they think is most likely is that this is a mating injury. And so
Yes.
what is happening here is that male hadrosaurs are mounting female hadrosaurs during mating and crushing their neural spines.
Hmm.
And they suggest that this actually is plausible because not only would this load be at the right angle for the injuries that they see based on their FEA modeling, but I mean we do know that they did have to mount to mate, so
Hmm.
that is a thing that we know occurred. I guess a behavior that we knew they were doing. So that, it does, yeah. Unlike some of the other hypotheses, we do know that they definitely were mating. Um, Now, they also talk a little bit about kind of sizes of different animals, different hadrosaurs, the weights they might have been. They talk a little bit about how some, we don't have evidence for sexual dimorphism in dinosaurs, and they go into this quite
Hmm.
to some extent. We don't have great evidence that there's loads and loads of sexual size dimorphism, although it is totally plausible that there was. But of course, the thing that we have with dinosaurs that is really different from mammals is that these animals hatched from very small eggs and had to grow very
Hmm.
quickly. We
Hmm.
don't really know when they reach sexual maturity, but it's been suggested to
Hmm.
be around 3 to 4 years. And we also do see a pattern in dinosaurs where we think that they reached sexual maturity before they reached skeletal maturity. So they would have still been growing when they reached sexual maturity. So there's this idea that you could have a kind of small, 2-ton female being mounted by a 7-ton male, that, old male that would then, cause some damage. And I
Blimey.
can imagine why, that may well have caused some damage. Um,
But
During
that's
this
speculation, right? Because we don't know whether there are males and females and whether there were size differences, right? I mean, that's just
Well,
sounds like some.
I think it's true to say that we do know that for dinosaurs we generally based on their population curves for things like hadrosaurs
Mhm.
where we do have very large population sizes, and based on their growth curves, we do think they reach sexual maturity before they reach skeletal maturity. So they were, you would be sexually mature before you had finished your growing. And
Okay.
of course, they did grow throughout their lives. So if you were a very, very old individual, we see a whole range of sizes. It is
Okay.
undeniable. We don't see like you don't kind of see a kind of adult size in the same way that we do with
Mhm.
humans. Some humans are 6'6" and some are 5'4". How tall
I
are
was
you, Rob?
more think I was more thinking about dogs and Great Danes and Chihuahuas and things like that, I guess, rather than.
Well,
But
they're bred though, aren't they? But I
that's
mean,
artificial selection, so we
yeah,
can't really go into that.
yeah. Um, so there's quite a lot of discussion then about, which I think is the thing that I sent you the picture of last night, which is about how they actually mated in terms of what their mating apparatus was.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so they took, what is this word that they use? I Where is it? I've got to find it. I wrote it in my notes riskily. Oh, an intromittent phallus. Now, I mating biology never really done, never really looked
Hmm.
into it in any depth.
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
going to on the train last night while I was reading this paper Google intromittent phallus,
Oh, I
but
googled it
then
this morning. I
well,
googled it this morning.
I decided not to. On my work laptop, I thought, is this a thing I need to Google? It reminded me of my friend Alex, who I lived with when I was PhD, not the intermittent phallus,
Mm.
but the
Hmm.
the Googling of inappropriate
All
terms.
right.
So Alex was Portuguese, and he wanted one of those hats. It was very cold in the UK relative to Portugal, and he wanted, those hats that have the kind of flaps that go down over your ears and buckle up onto
Deer
your chin.
stalker type thing, yeah.
Yeah, well, that sort of thing, but woolly.
Hmm.
And it was very cold, and he knew that that you have these things called earmuffs, and he knew you had these hats with these.
Hmm.
And so he Googled hat plus muff plus flaps. And he did not get, Rob, a deerstalker hat. That's
Did he
what he.
not?
So I just had Alex in my mind when I was thinking about whether or not I should Google the aversion of what aversion of intermittent fallacies meant.
So we're talking, I guess I guess I'm the biologist, right? So I guess I'm allowed to be the one that's meant to
Yeah,
allowed to
I'm
talk
asking
about
you.
these
I'm
sorts of
asking
things.
you
Yeah.
to please
Okay.
explain this.
Okay. Well, they do in the paper describe some of this. So snakes are weird, and snakes, alligators, and birds are the ones that I guess the interesting comparisons, right? They have an internal penis which they will invert. They talk about a cloacal kiss at one point in there, which I haven't Googled. So a cloaca is a urogenital opening in archosaurs, right? So you have, rather than having, as we do, multiple holes for multiple things, they have one hole which has all the sex organs and urine and poo all coming out the same hole. So a cloacal kiss is cloacal to cloacal content, and then all this, I should be doing justice with my fingers. These these the mating happens with these two holes coming together, and then the penis is introverted in that sense. It's not like a horse or an elephant where you might be dangling. These things are internal and then introverted. But they talked about club-shaped phalluses in ostriches, and this alarmed me a little bit. They also mentioned ducks explicitly because ducks are a weird outlier for. Oh, I don't want to go talking about the sex lives with ducks because it's disgusting.
It is. It's
It's
really disgusting.
it's really
They're
disgusting.
awful. Ducks are awful.
Oh, the level of violence and corkscrews and
Oh
oh
God.
no, let's not go into that. But anyway, the point is that modern comparisons are things like alligators, snakes, and ostriches make a good comparison point. But the cloaca to cloaca contact, which leads to this figure three, which is the Kama Sutra of hadrosaurs, I guess, which is like these plausible figures of how they. This is the figure that you sent me last night of the different kinds of hypotheses where they think the hadrosaurs were doing their business.
So this is the other anecdote I wanted to regale you with this morning,
Hmm.
which was so this is not the first time that I have seen this sort of figure. About, I don't know, when I was a postdoc, back in, I don't know, 2011 or something, and I was working on locomotion and hip morphology and stuff like this. And I got this email from this guy who I didn't know. And I got into work one morning, it's like 8 o'clock, and I opened my email and he said, I I I'm wondering whether you can help me because you work on hips. Could you tell me whether you think that the attached positions are plausible? And so I was like, what's he
Oh,
talking about? So I
this guy
opened,
is clearly dragging you into his kink world.
well, I opened this attachment.
Why? Why did you open the attachment,
Well, because I
Susie?
didn't I don't, well, I
Do you
mean,
know this person?
no, literally never met
No.
this person.
Right.
Okay.
Good
So
Lord.
I opened this attachment. And what it was it was like this image. So it was a series of different sketches of stegosaurs mating, but
Oh,
the stegosaurs had like enormously long kind of prehensile penises that were sort of
oh
wrapping
God.
around. And so immediately,
Oh
obviously,
God.
I like opened it, I looked at it, and went, and then I immediately closed it and like looked around my single person unshared office to check that nobody had seen. But because it was 8 a.m. at the Natural History Museum, it was going to be 2 hours before anybody else turned up. So there was nobody there. So it was fine. And then, of course, what do you think was my next course of action?
I really don't know. Delete and then move on.
Actually, Rob, I emailed them to everybody I knew.
What I think option number one was far more sensible. You're
No doubt. However,
you're now on some sort of list somewhere.
well, anyway, I think I emailed the guy saying I'm terribly sorry, I'm quite busy, and I don't think I have the time to take on this challenge right now.
Right, can I just for the sake of propriety here,
Okay,
tell everyone, do not DM Susie pictures of your hypotheses for our dinosaur
please.
mating. Please don't do that. Do not do that. I'm now wondering if me doing this is going to be a Streisand effect, and me telling people not to do it leads to them doing it. No, this isn't a Streisand effect. Do not do that. Do not do that.
Anyway, crashing on.
Anyway,
So
moving on, crashing on.
So anyway, there are basically these series of drawings in this paper that kind of show different kind of mate position, theoretical mating positions. There's one that neck in D. God, looks very awkward. Anyway,
So
and then
D
there's
to D is bumper to bumper. We'll put it that way, shall we?
and then there's a sort of artist's impression, which is a sort of more coloured version. Now, this is quite a funny one because the hadrosaur on top, which I assume is the male, he looks like he's got a blue towel draped over his neck, like he's
It does,
sweating or
doesn't
something.
it?
He's doing a workout.
She's really not having a good time. Her skin is, she's really damaged, this poor
Well,
female here.
this is the point, isn't it? The whole the back of the hadrosaur has been rubbed raw.
Oof.
Oh, it's a hell of a carpet burn.
But I guess that's what, to bring it back to the science, the idea here
Sorry.
is that if the man's on top of the male's on top of the female, then she's getting damaged vertebrae in the cloacal area as a result of the mating. That's the hypothesis, isn't it?
That is the hypothesis, yes. Um, yeah, so I mean that's basically the crux of the paper. The authors go through and talk a lot then about kind of semi-related things. So aggressive mating behaviors in modern animals, other evidence. I mean, caudal pathologies in other dinosaurs,
Hmm.
other evidence for this. Kind of various evidence for sort of sexual dimorphism and other ways of telling. I mean, I guess what
Hmm.
they're doing. I slightly lost why we were talking about all these things in the latter part of this paper,
Hmm.
but I guess I felt like some of these things they probably reviewers had raised some issues and they had to talk about them. And one of them I thought was maybe the reviewers had said, well, can you tell whether any of these dinosaurs are female? Can you actually tell whether the ones that have
Yeah.
the breaks are female? And I mean,
Hmm.
that's a really, really difficult to answer. The authors do a very good job of kind of going through and explaining how we can't tell that in the fossil record.
Yeah.
And we don't know whether any dinosaurs were female or male unless they're literally laying an egg. The eggs in the oviduct, which has happened in a pterosaur. There's a pterosaur with an egg in its oviduct. But apart from, I'm not aware that there's any dinosaurs where we found that. And then they talk a lot about kind of cranial ornamentation in hadrosaurs and how these funny crests that they have
Hmm.
previously been kind of used, uh, were thought to be to evidence for sexual dimorphism, and thought that males and females of these hadrosaurs had different shaped crests, but now we know that's
Hmm.
wrong. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of that. Um,
So where does this
yeah,
leave us, do you think?
where does it leave us? I mean, I think the I think it's an intriguing hypothesis.
Hmm.
I think that it is totally plausible. I mean, as I say, I
Hmm.
think it's behavior that we know occurred. We know they had to mate, otherwise
Hmm.
there wouldn't be very many of them.
Hmm.
I do think one thing that they do raise, which I think is an interesting point, is that we don't see this incidence of pathologies in other non-hadrosaurid iguanodontians.
Yes, that really caught my attention there when they started talking about iguanodon and sauropods. These things, this idea of being a large, big-tailed, quadrupedal thing is a problem for all of these dinosaurs, not just hadrosaurs. So why is it happening to hadrosaurs specifically? Maybe they were into different kinds of kinks. I shouldn't kink shame, but this is a different kind of behavior, right? Interesting question. But again, I think I agree with you though, that it's going to be really hard to ever test this, right? That we to get the available information from the fossil record to tell us, and ultimately, I guess, does it help? No, I guess it does help, right? We're talking about I was just thinking, that does it matter? It does matter, right? If we've got all these pathologies, it's going to tell us something interesting about the behavior of these things. But is it knowable? Is it testable? I don't know. It would take a really something exceptional to give us the data set to test this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's totally plausible. I think a huge amount of data has been collected for this study. And
Yes.
I think, the authors have really wrung absolutely everything that it was possible to
Oh
wring
yeah.
out of it.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
Mhm.
I think we have to give them their credit that they've gone through
Absolutely.
every possible hypothesis and scenario.
And
I
some that
think
maybe they shouldn't
and
have
some
done.
but I just don't think fundamentally it's really testable. I do think that though it could shed some really interesting light because actually, of that idea of hadrosaurs having different kinks. I mean, is this it could tell us something really interesting about kind of population dynamics or
Hmm.
like social structures
Hmm.
within hadrosaurs as opposed to other other iguanodontians and other dinosaurs and their
Hmm.
relatives.
Hmm.
It could tell us something super interesting.
Hmm.
I have concerns that, well, I'm not sure that the data is out there to tell us this.
Hmm.
And I think, there's this actually, the example that they give of the iguanodontians, there's this very nice collection of articulated iguanodon Bernus artensis specimens from Belgium, and
Hmm.
these are really cool. They're a huge. I don't know how many there are. There's like 80 or something. There's
Hmm.
tons of them anyway, and they were found in a sinkhole. So obviously this huge this herd, if you like, was kind of swallowed up in a sinkhole, and so they've been preserved in a way that I think we might be happy to speculate that is actually
Hmm.
a natural population,
Oh, good.
and that's probably the only one, and they don't find this incidence of pathologies. So
Are those ones iguanodons? Because Belgium's famous for having these nice, massive iguanodons, right? Or are those hadrosaurs?
no, they're Iguanodon Bernus artensis,
Okay,
which is a
yeah, yeah,
hadrosauroid. So it lies
yeah,
outside of Hadrosauridae,
yeah, yeah.
but is
Hmm.
is not
Hmm.
it's not 1,000 miles away from
Yeah.
hadrosaur. So they it could suggest that Iguanodon Bernus artensis population structures and social structures were different from
Hmm.
hadrosaurs, or it could suggest that in some way this Russian data is biased
Hmm.
towards animals that were sick or ill.
Hmm.
And I think that remains untested and
Yeah.
difficult, not untestable.
Well, I think the difficulty is to get the data to actually properly test this is going to be highly improbable. I mean, I
Yeah,
shouldn't rule it out. It might happen. So I guess that we're moving slightly into the realms of speculation. But hats off to them for the volume of data they've got here, and also systematically, as you said, running through all the different hypotheses and trying to evaluate them. So
yeah,
that's nice.
yeah.
Well, thanks, Susie, for dazzling me with this. Although I guess this was, in some senses, you were a bit hesitant to go into this topic. So I have to bear some responsibility for um, dragging you down into the lurid world of dinosaur mating. But sounds like, given that you're happily opening email attachments from strangers with the content of it, you're not afraid of this subject matter.
Well, yeah, as I was going to say, it did give me opportunities to tell you my Stegosaurus penis anecdote.
Which I'm still alarmed that you would open that. But you will not
I
be
didn't
opening
know it
any.
was going to be about their mating. I thought
Okay,
it might be about locomotion or
I
sitting or
see.
squatting.
Yeah.
He didn't specifically say, are these
Well,
sexual positions plausible?
I think squatting is featured in panel figure 3B, I think so. So we can see some squatting going on there. Anyway, that's a subject for another day. So I would encourage listeners to go and have a look at those pictures in a safe environment in this paper. Not the
Don't
ones that Susie
Google,
was said. No, this particular
don't Google
paper.
intermittent penis, phallus, whatever it's called. Don't
Uh,
Google it.
don't. Thanks, Susie. So next time I might tell you about humans, I guess. Do you want to go about humans or sharks? I guess I'll have that conversation with you offline. We can talk maybe both. I don't know.
Oh, sounds exciting. Either.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Susie. See you next time.
See you.
The Fossil Files was presented by Robert Sansom and Susanna Maidment. You can find more information, including links to the original papers that were discussed, at fossils.libsyn.com, and you can contact us at fossilfiles.pod@gmail.com.